how are you connecting with someone on the human level? How are you activating their interest? How are you demonstrating your curiosity about them, right? Because we know that the way to become interesting to someone else is to be interested in them. So are we asking good questions? Are we really listening slowly to the answer so we fully comprehend what they're trying to say, which is that's the path, that's the gate that opens to empathy.
Welcome to Coach the Sale, the podcast for sales professionals on the path to becoming sales leaders. Each week, we sit down with sales coaches, successful sales leaders, and others at the top of their game to share what they've learned and help you to coach the sale.
Hi, and welcome to episode number 18 of Coach the Sale. I'm your host, Matt Heyman. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me on the podcast today. Before we get into the episode, I have a favour to ask. You know how on every podcast, the host always asks for ratings and reviews on iTunes? Well, I'm not going to do that. What I would like you to do, though, is head on over to Refract.ai/Matt, and that will take you to my LinkedIn profile. I really want to connect with you, and I really want to hear your feedback via LinkedIn on the podcast. What are we doing right? What would you like to hear more of? What would you like to hear less of? I'm really open to hearing your feedback on the show, and I think LinkedIn is a great place to do that. So let's connect and let's get the conversation going. My guest today on the podcast is Andy Poole. Now, when it comes to engaging new prospects, so many sales professionals wade into uncharted waters without proper preparation. Sometimes they might forget to do adequate research on their prospective buyers, or they just aren't able to identify the necessary pain points in order to close the sale. My guest today, Andy Poole, suggests that this is down to a fundamental problem in the discovery process within sales. Andy Poole, I would argue, is one of the foremost authorities on sales training and sales coaching, with well over 4 decades of proven success closing deals and making sales. In this episode, we're going to discuss how using discovery can better prepare SDRs to get to know their prospects and clients better. In this episode, we cover how best to introduce discovery into the sales process, digging deep to find out what drives your buyer's decision making. We talk a lot about the strategy of not hiding your competitors from prospective customers, really ascertaining what your client needs, and building lasting relationships with other stakeholders in the sales process. The importance and benefits of building trust, respect, and connections first, with some great tips on how to do that. And finally, coaching others so that they can use the tools of better discovery too. I think you're going to enjoy this episode a lot. My thanks to Andy Poole for being so generous with his time and his insights on this episode. Let's get straight to it with Andy Poole. Andy, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Matt, thanks for having me. I'm doing great.
Excellent, excellent. Thrilled you're on the podcast. You and I spoke before we recorded around some of the areas that we're going to talk about today, and I'm particularly interested in some of the topics we're going to talk about, some of the research, and how people who are listening to the show can start to apply that knowledge to their own practice. Before we get started, how about a quick introduction? Who are you? What do you do? Give us the Andy Poole story in a nutshell.
Gosh, that's hard to do. Once you get me started talking, it may be a long one. I've been in sales for over 40 years, for 4 decades, more almost, and sort of interesting career path. Sell everything from women's shoes to complex satellite communications networks that sold for tens of millions of dollars. So I've sort of really spanned the whole side, both from B2C to B2B, and just about started my own consulting company in 2000. I worked for a series of startups, started my own company in 2000, been working with countless companies, primarily in the US, to help them transform their sales. And since 2012, I've been on this journey of being an author and a speaker and a thinker about sales.
Excellent. And you have a podcast. If people don't know about it, let's get a plug in early for the podcast.
Okay. Yes, I do have a podcast called Accelerate with Andy Poole, and I think 718 episodes so far, at least as of the time we're recording this. So yeah, I've been around for a while and have a lot of great guests on and really dive deep into specific aspects of sales. And if people want to listen to it, as I think one of the attractions is that I challenge a lot of things. So the conventional wisdom, if you will.
Yeah. And I mean, that's an impressive number. You're at least 700 episodes ahead of me. So I can only imagine the amount of time and energy and work that's gone into those. So, but yeah, I do recommend people check out the podcast. I think it's a brilliant listen. And you publish quite regularly, don't you? You have quite a frequent schedule of podcasts that go out.
Well, yeah, now we're weekly. When we first started, we were doing a little more frequently than that. But yeah, we scaled back to weekly a couple of years ago. And it's a good cadence to be on.
Excellent. So you and I talked about the topic for the show. We want to focus on discovery, and this is completely by accident. Something happened today that got me particularly interested in this topic yet again. I was talking with a head of sales for a startup, fairly big startup. Hopefully he will be a guest on a future episode. But he and I were talking about his career path and him starting at this software company. And the story that he told me was when he arrived at the software company, they were doing around an average order of about $40 per month. So it's a SaaS subscription model, average order, $40 a month, pretty typical. Within a month or two of him being there, they had taken that $40 to $400. And so inevitably I asked the question, how did you do that? And his answer to me was discovery. We introduced discovery into the sales process. Before, reps were going straight in, jumping in with a product demo, throwing all the features at the prospect, and a lot of them were buying, but their average order value was low. By adding in a discovery, he saw the average order value go up significantly. And so I think that's a useful starting point for us to talk about discovery and the importance of discovery. Give people a flavor of your take on discovery. Why is it so important, and why is it often missed?
Well, everybody does a level of discovery, right? And I think to the point of the story you just told, is that certainly in the SaaS business being one example, is that given that we've changed the business model, the stakes are relatively low if you make a bad decision as a buyer, right? You're not buying a license that's on-prem hosted that's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's going to be $40 a month per user, and if we don't like it, we cancel after a month. And in those scenarios, the salespeople basically are going for the sale as opposed to really just to get the foot in the door, rather than trying to actually find out what the customer wants. And so you can start seeing this more transactional environment where people sort of skip discovery. But yeah, if you want to do as that person suggested, and you want to increase your average order size, for instance, which is absolutely crucial if you want to increase your win rate, is you have to really find out what's driving the decision on the part of the customer. And that's distinct from saying, look, I need to understand what their requirements are, what their pain points are. Yeah, sure. But I really want to find out what's driving the decision.
And I think that's a lovely segue into a report that you and I know have read many times and are huge fans of, research put out by Gartner into the buying journey, particularly the B2B buying journey.
Right.
Give people a sense, if they haven't read that, what are some of the themes that come out of that article that are particularly relevant for you?
Well, so there's a famous diagram that describes the buyer's journey, and I urge everybody you can find this online. You can find it in some articles that are posted on my website. I've used this before as an example. Basically, that Gartner drew the buying sort of typical buying journey based on their research with thousands of enterprises, and unlike the way most sellers conceive of their sales process as being sort of this linear stage-based process that goes very neatly from point A to point B, this was what Gartner calls the spaghetti diagram, which is it's a flow chart that is virtually impossible to follow, right? Just because there's so many overlapping lines. And the thing that's most striking about it is, and it's very dense. You look at it, there's probably 100 boxes on the page or something like that, you can't find the word sales on it. I mean, for me, that was one of the most striking things, is that in the lower right-hand quadrant, you see the word ask sales for more information. And that's it. So you're looking from the buyer's perspective. They're saying, look, we're starting to go through this somewhat on our own, right? Driven by our own requirements. And we can sort of do a lot of this without too much help from the vendor. And it says, okay, well then, really, what is the role of the vendor there? And then what is the role of discovery in this environment where the buyer is sort of being driven? And that's where it gets down to this idea of as a seller, when you're looking at this buying journey, which is a complex thing, the buyer doesn't understand it themselves, which is one of the key lessons of the Gartner report, is that buyers are making it up as they go.
And overwhelmed as well. They're overwhelmed. The report speaks to just the sheer overwhelm of information as opposed to a lack of information.
Exactly. And so how can you best be of service in that environment? And again, also find out what are the real motivations behind this investment decision they're going to be making.
Yeah, there are two key takeaways for me from the report in particular. One is the non-linear aspect of it. The fact that this isn't, as sales professionals, we like to think of, it's step 1, step 2, step 3, a funnel in a sense, a very linear process.
Well, as I said, linear stage-based process, yes.
So that for me is key, that the fact that just how non-linear it is. But the second point is that there are buying jobs, that prospects have a series of jobs. And if a salesperson can help them fulfill all of those jobs, ideally within the same sort of time frame, then that's where the sale occurs. Do you want to talk a bit more about the buying jobs in particular, the elements that are key in the process?
Yeah, I have to admit, I don't recall all 4 off the top of my head, but there are 4. But I think that
let me jump in. I don't want to stitch you up and let you struggle. So, problem identification is the first one. Solution exploration, requirement building, and then supplier selection. Those are like the 4 key ones. And then after that, you have validation and then building a consensus internally. So the key: problem identification, solution exploration, requirement building, and supplier selection. They're the main jobs that the report suggests are the ones that are at the top of the tree.
Right. And I think the critical point for those that Gartner brings out, and one of the reasons I loved that report when I first read it and first heard about the research, which actually was just about a year ago, was that it, you have these experiences in your own career and it sort of validates what you've experienced. And so it was kind of fun from that perspective to think, okay, I'm not crazy. But is that discovery is not, a one-time process. Just like qualification is not a one-time process. As the buyer goes through this journey of accomplishing these jobs, let's say problem identification, is, as Gartner points out, is these are actually loops. And that as you may think that you've accomplished this job, or the buyer may think they've accomplished this particular job, but then a new stakeholder gets involved and it gets reopened again, or a new perspective gets added from a vendor and that job reopens again and they loop back on it. And so you have sort of this continually updating process, which makes so much sense when you think about it from a discovery standpoint and a qualification standpoint, because those two are so closely linked, is that by virtue of going through a buying process or by virtue of having somebody be sold to, is your requirements and your perspective about your requirements changes, right? As you become educated. And as you become educated, you think, oh, I didn't know we could do that. So now let's factor that. I didn't know we could do ABC. Well, now that we can think we could do ABC, how does that have an impact on our identification of our problem and the solution we think we need for it? And so as a seller, when you're really looking at discovery, it's not, hey, we've got my discovery stage and I'm going to check off this box and said I asked these 10 questions and that's my exit criteria and I've got answers for them. And it's like, yeah, those are static questions in a very dynamic environment. And you really have to avoid being stuck in sort of the static perspective of what discovery is and sales in general, and say, yeah, everything I know today could necessarily change tomorrow based on what the customer learns.
And being flexible to return to those points and not consider them ticked off the list.
Exactly.
That flexibility to return to that and know that may well come up in the process.
Yeah. And so I've written in the past about, it's sort of like and I'm not a physicist, but draw sort of analogy to Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty, where they talk about the observer effect, as you can't measure position and velocity at the exact same time. And by virtue of trying to do that, you necessarily change the outcome. Well, same thing as, the position and velocity of the buyer is going to change by you engaging with them and selling to them and them, speaking with you. So that's, to me, that's not, oh my gosh, something I really have to watch out for. That is an opportunity as a seller, because if you stay attuned to this process and that the buyer is going through and understand that they're necessarily changing based on what they're learning, then you're ahead of the game, right? Then you can help direct that journey much better than someone says, oh yeah, we did that. Now let's move on to the next phase.
Yeah, really a concrete example from our own experiences. Refract operates in a category that in some cases is relatively unknown. And so prospects may come to us having discovered Refract, but in the process of doing that, they then discover that we have some competitors, and they would never have even been aware of those competitors or even the category
Mm-hmm.
had they not found out about us in the first
Mm-hmm.
place. And so as part of what we do, we're always looking to educate the customer, to help the customer not hide from competitors, but almost embrace that. I guess that's what you're speaking to in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, I think one of the worst things as a seller is to have no competition in a deal. I mean, to me, that increases the likelihood that the customer ends up with making no decision to proceed at all. And so I think you, rather than run away from your competition, you want to embrace it and use it to your advantage by saying, look, yeah, my competitors, they're locked into this old-fashioned model of sales. They're going to do their one-time discovery call. Yeah, we did that. Yet we're going to stay alive to the possibility because there's some ambiguity here. And ambiguity is really opportunity in sales.
Excellent. So let's move on to discovery specifically.
Sure.
In particular, then, how would, just so everybody's clear, we're talking about the same thing here. How are you defining discovery? What constitutes discovery from your side?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think where I look at it more comprehensively, perhaps than sort of traditional ways of doing it, which is for most people, discovery is, yeah, I've got this list of questions that I've been told we need to get answered, and based on that, then we could do some sort of fundamental needs analysis for the buyer and see if they're possibly a fit for what we're selling. And you still have to do that, but I think there's a greater question you really want to answer, and that is that everybody has what I call the one thing that really is driving their decision. And I'll give you an example. So early in my career, I went through this very competitive sales process to sell a computer system to a fairly mid-sized company, 150 million dollar a year company, and it was for an accounting system. So we went through this, detailed evaluation of their needs and extensive demonstrations of all the accounting modules that we were selling to them and so on. And I remember going back to the customer, visiting them, let's say about 6 months after they had installed the system. And of the 10 packages, accounting packages we had sold them or modules we had sold them, they were using one. And I'm like, guys, talking to the CEO, I said, you made me jump through hoops on this and all this detail and all these. He goes, yeah, but we were only concerned about the billing module, excuse me. So all they were doing is invoicing. He said, that's how we justified the whole purchase price, was being more effective on our invoicing. Yeah, we're going to get to the other stuff eventually. But that was the thing that really drove it. And for me, that was so eye-opening because I have example after example after example as I went through my own sales career when I was personally selling or managing sales teams at startups, where that's what happened. Is the customer, we could be selling a large complex system with all these various attributes to it, but there's always one thing that was driving that decision. And the challenge was to find the right person. Oftentimes it was the CEO, but find that right person who could speak for the company in terms of what that priority item was. And that's really your job as a seller, because that's the way decisions really, I think, in my experience, that's the way the decisions are made is, we're evaluating everything, but there's one thing that's really driving it.
So the obvious question now is, how on earth do you go about trying to ascertain this one thing? And as a supplementary question to make it that little bit harder,
sure,
how do you differentiate between the noise that may come out in your attempts to find that and the actual deeper answer?
Right. Well, so the second part of that question we'll sort of address first, which is that discovery is really tied with qualification. I mean, to me, when I look at it sort of as one thing almost, not two separate steps. And for someone to really be considered a qualified prospect and this is, my experience, what I've seen time and time again over my 4 decades of sales, is that until the customer can quantify the value of the outcomes they want to achieve in dollars or whatever currency they use, they're not yet qualified to be a prospect. They're not a finally qualified prospect, meaning until they've said, look, based on what we know so far and based on the pricing we've seen and the outcomes we think we can achieve. We've done this internal business case, and we said, yeah, it's worth continuing this search. And so that business case is going to be based on the one thing, right? So now if we say, okay, let's back up here, is how do we get to that understanding? How do we make the connections with people? And it's really back to the fundamentals of sales, which I talk about, which is you have to be able to build strong enough relationships with the stakeholders that you're talking to that they will feel comfortable telling you what that is. And people want to just assume that, hey, I'm talking to someone, they're trying to buy something, they're going to be completely open with me about what their motivations are. They're going to be completely open with me about what they're trying to achieve. And they're not equally open. They're not equally accessible. It's based on the level of respect and trust and connections you have with each of the individual stakeholders, or in particular with that one person that really knows that answer. And so it really gets back to the beginning. How are you connecting with someone on the human level? How are you activating their interest? How are you demonstrating your curiosity about them, right? Because we know that the way to become interesting to someone else is to be interested in them. So are we asking good questions? Are we really listening slowly to the answer so we fully comprehend what they're trying to say, which is that's the path, that's the gate that opens to empathy. Are we ensuring that every time we interact with the buyer that we're delivering something of value to them, so that at the end of the interaction, whether it's a phone call or a video call or whatever, they've made progress in their own buyer's journey, meaning they're closer to making a decision at the end of the call than they were at the beginning. If you start that base, then people are going to open up. They're going to give you their time, right? Because they know they're going to get something in return for it. And people be more revealing, if you will, about what their motivations are and what they're trying to achieve. So it really starts with the relationship. And I don't want people to be confused about this. It's not about making friends with people, because there's a certain segment you see online of, and I'm doing air quotes around sales experts here, who are sort of saying relationships are dead in sales. And nothing could be further from the truth. If you want to be effective at doing discoveries, people have to feel comfortable with you. They don't necessarily have to tell you everything. It's not their obligation. They have to feel that they can trust you, that your motivations are transparent, that you're working for them. You're just not trying to do a transaction. And all that has an impact on how much you're going to learn in discovery.
So there are going to be people who are listening to this who, whilst we've started the whole episode by talking about how non-linear the whole process is, there are going to be people listening, including members of the Refract team, who do discovery calls. Let's try and fuse these two things together and think about what are some of the outcomes in that initial discovery call that you think would lead a sales professional to consider that discovery to be successful? What are some of those outcomes that you think are the indicator of a successful discovery?
Well, I may be a bit contrary on this, because I don't I don't know if there necessarily are discovery calls per se, right? I mean, I think that your motivation as a seller should be to say, look, I'm going to have an interaction with this buyer, and we could be a stage where we'll call it the discovery stage. We're trying to learn more about their requirements. But you're not just gathering information. Every time you interact with the buyer, again, you have to be delivering something of value to them that helps them move closer to making a decision. And that includes during discovery. People tend to think of discovery as sort of this take. Every time you interact with the buyer, there's got to be give on your part. And so part of it can come down to just, hey, how did we ask the questions, right? Are we asking the questions? There's a way you can ask a question that does start delivering value to a buyer. For instance, you could, typical discovery call, Mr. Prospect, do you have the requirement to do ABC? Let's say that's a feature set. And this is pretty typical. You go through a list of questions. Would it be nice if you could do this? Do you have an interest in doing this? As opposed to saying, now, Mr. Prospect, what would the impact be on your, let's say, your revenue, your sales over the next year if you could do ABC? So suddenly now you haven't said that you do ABC, and you're not really asking, if they have a particular pain point, you're saying, what would the impact be for you? So now they have to think about the answer. And this is really what you want to achieve during discovery is, are the questions you ask requiring them not to give you a rote answer, but to actually think about what the impact of doing whatever would be on their business, on the relevant portion of business that your solution addresses.
I like it a lot. I think that's really, really valuable. What about then, how do you walk a fine line between asking questions like that perhaps the prospect feels put on the spot? Because I can imagine asking particularly pertinent questions, not the one you gave, but others I can think of that maybe would put the prospect on the spot. How do you try and navigate that?
Well, this gets back to the connection and the relationship. See, they're going to feel more on the spot if you're just coming right in and jumping right into it. I mean, think about it, and this is something that maybe seems evident or maybe too obvious, but it's missed by too many sellers. Is you would, outside of work context, if you met somebody new, would you immediately start asking them the most personal questions about themselves? Personal information? Of course you wouldn't. You I mean, certain personality types might, but in general, as humans, we wouldn't do that, right? We'd get to know the person. We'd be curious. We'd ask some questions more generally about them. Where are you from? How long have you lived here? Da, 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 da. But yet they get into a business situation with another human being and they think, well, we don't have to do that because we're here to do business. So I'm just going to jump in and ask my questions. And if you don't have that foundation with this other human being that you're dealing with, they're not going to answer. So to your point is you have to invest in being the best you can be at connecting with someone else, at being curious about them and building that trust that enables them to open up. And again, I'll reiterate something I said before, is too often sellers think this is business. That's their job to give me this information. If I ask, they'll have to tell me. And that's not the way humans work. It doesn't matter if it's in life outside of work or if it's in work. You have to build that foundation of trust and respect and connection first.
I think there's so much to be said for the ability within the discovery or throughout the sales process, the ability to educate and inform and to provide genuine value, even if the sale goes nowhere, that at least you've been able to impart some information that the prospect can walk away from feeling like they've got something. And I guess those questions would be part of that. Mm-hmm. What do you think about other approaches that involve that kind of education piece, not being patronizing or condescending, but being able to genuinely offer some educational value early on in the sales process to build that trust?
Well, and so when you look at the question format that I sort of laid out for you, what would the impact be, is what you're doing is you're opening the door to that education. Because first of all, they're thinking about it in the context of their own business, right? So they're starting to build their own story, right, about what it would be like to use your product or service. Because they've thought about, if we did it, this is what the impact would be. I can start to envision this outcome using Refract, let's say. So they're starting their education right there. And then, based on what their answer is, that's when you roll out a short story. Well, that's really interesting, Mr. Prospect, because that's very similar to company XYZ that we work for. They had this similar problem. They chose to work with us because we were able to provide this outcome. And as a result, they've achieved this, this dollar, this increased market share, increased sales, whatever. In 20 seconds, then you just educated them about somebody that had a similar challenge. And yet they've already started to envision their outcome in their own mind. You've just supported it. So you've moved them further down the path because they say, now we got some validation about this vision I'm having. I get it. Somebody else thinks like I do.
Superb. So Andy, I guess next question from me then is whether or not you can recall examples. You coach, you do training. Any examples that you can recall of particularly good discovery techniques, or just simply a story of a person or a time when you've experienced discovery and it's made a big difference for you? I'd love to know if you have any specific examples that you can share.
Well, yeah. I mean, I spent a good chunk of my career before starting my own company with 7 or 8 different startup companies in the tech space, both as an individual contributor as VP. And we're selling, by and large, during a good chunk of that career, I was selling these large mission-critical networks, communications networks, to some of the world's largest companies as a startup with no track record, no brand name, no nothing. And we were competing against large multinational tech companies. And yet we won a ton of business, and these companies grew substantially. And so the question was always, well, how do you do that, right? How do you compete on that basis? And a lot of that really starts in discovery because, and some people might say, well, this sounds like the challenger sale. And to some degree, it is to a certain degree. But through the questions you ask in discovery, if you're asking them in the framework of terms of putting the customer in the frame of the questions, right? In terms of they have to think about and think deeply and pause and think about, okay, what will the impact be? What it would mean for them? They start thinking about things that are different, or they start thinking differently about the problems and the potential solutions to those problems that they have. And so that to me is where discovery really was important, is I could then use the discovery question, say, well, have you ever thought about what the impact would be for you if you could do X, Y, Z? Is if they'd never thought of that before, suddenly you start opening their eyes to new possibilities. And we had often run into cases where we're selling to large enterprises where the goal would be look, they're doing a survey of X number of vendors, maybe 10 vendors, with the goal of reducing it down to 2 or 3, and then they'll release an RFP to the final 3. Our goal is using really the power of discovery is to shape and influence the final RFP, not only to be one of the final 3 vendors, but also have to be shaped to our vision that we're shaping for the customer of what they can achieve. That's unique, perhaps, and different from what they had set out initially to do. So, yeah, to me, that happens during discovery. That's where you're really opening the customer's eyes, not during a presentation. You can come in and give a presentation that says, look, have you ever thought about doing X, Y, Z? Okay, well, in a presentation setting, it's not quite the same, right? Whereas discovery is really collaboration. If you set up the relationship and the connection with the customer, you're having this conversation, and suddenly you start collaborating on this potential outcome they can achieve. And they're learning and they're being educated through the questions you're asking them.
I absolutely love that. That is, for me, that's absolutely key.
And that's how we, as a smaller companies in the past, is how we competed. Is we'd tilt the playing field in our favor, but we did it by opening the customer's eyes through the questions we asked.
Yeah, the thing for me, that absolutely resonates with me. Prior to Refract, I had an agency. I built an agency, and constantly we would be going in and pitching to prospects, selling services. And initially we'd be brought in on the basis of, can you supply X? And then they would go to a number of vendors, and the vendors would compete. But the approach I always took was to focus on the outcome of the prospect, similar to what we've been talking about already. Focus on the outcome and then work together to collaborate on a solution that ultimately meant we took control of the discussion and started to lead that discussion. And for me, the number of times that we were successful in that regard meant that it was just the right approach. It developed a relationship really, really early on, really positive relationship, but also that relationship extended far beyond the sale. It extended into the customer relationship. And I think for me, that's absolutely critical. And it saw us successful many times.
Yeah. And it's the point I made before, is that you have to have that relationship in place first, though, to really be very effective at that. So another example is one startup I was leading sales on. We were selling to this, one of the world's largest cruise lines at the time. And it was going to be the first example really in the world of high-speed internet communications to a cruise ship. And so this was a while ago. And but it was quite revolutionary. And so what they had a complex list of requirements. Is, look, we would need customers want high-speed browsing in their staterooms. We wanted to be able to do voice over IP. We wanted to also connect in all of our mechanical operations on board the ship back to our operations group, and a list of requirements. And they had a compliance matrix in their RFP that ran 300 items. And you know that you can't compete on the basis of 300 items. There's always, as I said, this one thing. And what we found is, because we had built up a really good relationship with the CEO of this company, who had been the founder, is that the one thing actually wasn't even on the compliance matrix. The only thing he was cared about was how reliable the communications link was between the onboard casinos and headquarters, because he wanted to know every minute exactly how much money they were taking in from the gamblers. And that's really all he cared about. And so that wasn't even addressed in the RFP. So when we replied, we pretty much ignored the RFP. And we focused purely on how are we going to make sure that there was triple redundancy on this link that would never go down, that was always going to be available for them. So he would always be informed. He's the CEO. Yeah, we won. It was $8 million. I mean, we won easily against some really big names because we were addressing the thing that was really driving the decision.
Absolutely fantastic example. So with one eye on the time, I just want to pivot onto a final question. There are people listening to this show who either coach staff at the moment, they coach colleagues at the moment, or they aspire to coach people in the future. What advice can you give to people around coaching others in the discovery? What pointers can you give people who are trying to support other people elevate their discovery? What things can they do to coach other people better in that regard?
Well, focus on two things. One is spend time educating your people about getting back to the fundamentals. How do I connect with another human being? How do I activate their interest? So I've got this acronym I talk about that it's called BALD, B-A-L-D. And these are the 4 core sales skills that every seller needs to master. So if you can focus on these and coach your people getting better at these. And so the B stands for be human, meaning, if you're in a call with a customer or prospect, are you present? Are you checking your phone? Are you paying attention to what they're doing? Are you curious in them? Do you have just a base level of curiosity that makes you want to learn something from this person? The A stands for ask great questions, right? As we talked about, ask questions that invoke a personal response from someone. I mean, a great discovery question, which is oftentimes overlooked because we're so scripted these days, is once you've built this relationship at some level with a person, there's multiple stakeholders you can ask this question to. It's a great question. So if you make the decision to move ahead with this investment, this project, what will the impact be on you personally? And you start learning all sorts of information because people, it's like, oh, if you built the relationship to the point where they feel like they can open up about this, you start getting insights into the company and this person's critical stakeholders' motivations, what's driving them. Absolutely valuable information. So again, questions all about impact and how they help impact the person personally as well. So be human, ask great questions, listen slowly. That's the L, right? Don't think ahead to the next question you want to ask. Actually listen to the answer. And I hear this on recorded calls all the time with reps when they're doing discovery calls, is they jump to the next question rather than saying, oh, here's an opportunity to go deeper and to ask this great follow-up question like, Ms. Prospect, that's really interesting. So what else can you tell me about that? Or that's interesting, but tell me more about that. But again, if you haven't built that relationship, you might not be comfortable asking that. You might feel you have to go ahead and ask that next question on your script. So listen slowly. When a customer gives you an answer to a question you've asked, put this into your process. Pause for a second before you say anything. And just think, what did they just tell me? Build in thinking time. So that's what I call listening slowly. Actually physically pause and give yourself the chance to think and say, okay, what's the next best question I can ask now? Is it the next question on my list? Or is it, that's interesting. I heard some other customers talk about this. So what else can you tell me about that? And then D is deliver value, right? Is through the questions you're asking, as I talked about before, when you ask from the perspective, what would the impact on them if they could do, then your prospects aren't stupid. They understand. When you ask that question, oh, these guys can do that. Interesting. I didn't know that. You've delivered something of value to them.
I love it. Brilliant. And what a nice way to round off the episode. You've delivered a huge amount of value for us. And I'm really, really grateful. You've been extremely generous with the insights that you've given us, Andy.
Sure.
Yeah, superb. So I guess next question then, how can people find out more about you and the work that you do?
Well, they can, a couple things. One is, so I've have this performance enhancement program that I run called the Sales House. And I urge people to come check out the Sales House. It's at thesaleshouse.com. It's a subscription service, but we have courses that dig into the details of what we've talked about here today. We do live coaching every week. We have a private Slack community where we have an engaged community of members who are constantly sharing best practices. So I urge people to check out thesaleshouse.com. Go to my other website, andypaul.com, where I talk about some of the services I provide personally, and my blog is there, and I do blog daily. Or join my mail list at thesaleshouse.com/subscribe. And it goes out to thousands of people every day. A sales tip or sales perspective, if you will.
Excellent. We'll be sure to link up to all of those in the show notes and make sure that everybody has access to them. Last thing from me is just to thank you once again for, as I say, delivering a huge amount of value to the audience. I know this is going to be a very popular show. I'd encourage people to check out your podcast. And Andy, thank you. Have a great day.
Matt, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Coach the Sale. For show notes, sales coaching resources, and more, visit refract.ai/coach.